So, golly, we got three great journalists here who I am privileged to share the stage with. So I'm going to start with a brief intro. Were there intros for the panel? We were backstage just yakking away. So anyway, we're Ken, the legendary Ken Auletta. Ken is the author of 12 books, including 5 national bestsellers. Three Blind Mice, How the TV Networks Lost Their Way, a personal favorite of mine, thank you.
That's because he was a character in it.
You didn't have to go that far.
Right.
Oh, gosh. World War 3.0, another doozy, Microsoft and its enemies from Ken, and Google, the end of the world as we know it. So on that cheerful note, you should know Ken also won numerous journalistic awards, which I'm not going to list all of. He's been
Thank you.
He's been chosen as a literary lion of the New York Public Library, and last but not least, one of the 20th century's top 100 business journalists. That's Ken Auletta. Yeah, give it up for Ken. Thank you. Nate Silver. Nate Silver is the New York Times best-selling author, of course, of The Signal and the Noise, and most recently, On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything, which is a must-read, please. It's really cool. If you're in this room, you'll want to read that book. He writes the popular Substack, Silver Bulletin. He's also an investor in Substack, so we'll find out a little bit about that. And was the founder of 538. He's a pioneer in the field of data journalism, as many of you know, and has been named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business, Time Magazine's 100 most influential people, and Rolling Stone's 100 Agents of Change. Nate Silver, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
And then, last but not least, Molly Jong-Fast. And Molly is an MSNBC political analyst. Yes. Host, go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you. Host of the Fast Politics podcast and a Vanity Fair special correspondent. She's the author of 3 books herself, and her memoir, which is coming out from Viking this June, is How to Lose Your Mother.
Yeah.
If you can't find Molly after the program, you can find her on Threads, X, Instagram, and I should note that she is now on my list 100 personal coolest people I know. So, Molly, here you go. All right, I'm going to start with you, Molly.
Oh, good.
Let's shake it up with social media.
Yes.
All right. Who or what do you really love about social media, and what do you really dislike?
So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. I am sad I'm not on any lists, but I'm glad that you made up a list for me. That was fun.
What's it made of? It's a big
It
list.
was a good made-up list. I like it. I'll take it. So I think so here's what I think happened, and I'm curious what the other panelists think too, because social media started out as free content, right? These tech companies used our tweets, our content, our writing for free. We grew followings, but along the way, they pretty much, they sort of killed traditional media in a lot of ways. And I come from writing books and magazine articles, so I come from the 90s. I'm a 90s person. So I remember when magazines, I'm just reading Graydon Carter's wonderful memoir, and the private cars, and you made thousands of dollars for writing a magazine article. It was a very different time. Got paid by the word. I remember I once but anyway, the point is, never mind. I once got offered by Teen People magazine some exorbitant sum, and I was like, I am better than Teen People magazine. And for years I was like, I am not better than Teen People magazine. I should have taken that money. But the point is, there was a victim of social media, and it was mainstream media, I think. And so I really resent tech companies, because I feel like they did so well on our content, and then they were like, we're geniuses. Yeah. We made all this money, we're the best, and now they're ruining democracy. So I'm not a fan personally, but I think I think of social media as like I have to do it because I need to be able to communicate. But I think that they have done as dirty as possible for both the mainstream media, the creative class, and by the way, what they really want to do is replace us with AI robots. So I don't have a great feeling about tech
Okay, we'll get to the AI robots in a second, but Nate first,
Yeah,
what do you love, what do you dislike?
there's this thing called the Fermi paradox, which is a question astronomers pose about how come we don't, supposedly statistically, right, there are billions and billions of solar systems, you should have some sign of intelligent life, and that we haven't encountered any, right? And what's the reason for that? And I think the reason might be that Twitter, right? At some point, a civilization becomes advanced enough to invent Twitter, or a Twitter-like platform, right? And then we destroy ourselves pretty much.
Yeah, that sounds right.
No, look, unlike some people, I think every iteration of Twitter, except maybe kind of the first one where it is kind of nerdier, I think every iteration has been bad. I think it really gamifies partisanship, right? In the Elon iteration, you also have the fact that like he has really crushed external links to external sites, right? So the New York Times probably wasn't thrilled, for example, to have its journalists on Twitter, where some of them were combative or weren't towing the party line or whatever else, right? But it was at least a source of like buzz and traffic, and now it's like this inner walled garden with like a lot of cat turd, literally the Twitter, if you don't follow Twitter, don't worry about this, right? But like, no, look, I think, I'm an optimist as far as technological growth. I think social media has been like uniquely destructive to our political culture.
You want to jump in on that one, Ken?
I agree with that. But actually, if you go back to when the internet came aboard for us was the early 2000s. And at the time, everyone said it's going to democratize information. And in many ways, it did. It gave us many more sources of information. Go back and think about the Arab Spring. And suddenly, everyone with a cell phone was a reporter. And they could report from the deep recesses of a country what was happening, and that was fabulous. But now there are too many voices out there. And to go back to the point Molly made about the disruption of the Silicon Valley, when I was doing my Google book, I was kind of implanted in Mountain View. I was there most days, and I had access to the campus. And one day, and I wanted to look at all the programs they were doing. And I said, can I look at how you're digitizing books? And they, sure, we'll give a presentation to you. So I go downstairs, and the whole team of digital book people are there. And they say, let us show you what we do. Let us show you what we do with your book, one of your books, Ken. And they put on the screen my book, and they said, anyone could search through and read any chapter they want. They could print out the entire book. Isn't that, we're making you more popular, Ken. Isn't that wonderful? Right. And I, as a reporter, just kept my cool. I didn't complain. I didn't say, I just asked questions. And I got out of the meeting, and who'd I call? My publisher. And I called my publisher and said, what the fuck is going on here? Anyway, so
Go ahead, Molly.
That's the problem, is they don't feel, we are the content, they don't care about our content, right? Our content has no value to them except in sort of bettering their technology.
Molly, I would make a little broader argument there. What I discovered about the engineers at Google sitting in for 3 or so years that I was doing this is they view disruption as a great virtue. And the reason it's a great virtue is they were making things easier for consumers. Right. Isn't this great, Ken? Under fair use, we can make all this available. Your books can be available. They didn't think about how it affects my income as an author. I wouldn't have any income anymore. But essentially, disruption was the virtue they were chasing. And they chased it successfully, but not successfully for publications, et cetera, that were disrupted.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people, including Silicon Valley, have the problem of viewing the world. They view the rest of the world as the video game term is non-player characters, right? They're like, we have agency and we make decisions, and then we'll make changes and extract more profit or make the world more efficient or whatever else, right? But like,
I think
the system changes and the system reacts.
I think you should explain what non-playing characters are.
So if you play a video game, I know we have different ages in the audience, right? But like, a non-player character is like someone who like is really dumb. They like sell you some magic potion, right? and they don't have any ability or agency or judgment or whatever else, right? And like Silicon Valley, and by the way, lots of people have this problem, they kind of assume that everyone else will not strategically adapt to the world that they're creating and that there aren't second order effects, right? That if you kind of like squeeze the incentive for creatives to be on Twitter because you're not looking back to their platforms, well, sooner or later, they won't post on Twitter. They'll go to Substack or Blue Sky or Threads or whatever else, right? And that decreases the quality of the platform, that decreases the reason to be there, then brands get more uncomfortable. And so, you know, look, one of the things I do for a living is play poker. And in poker, you have to assume that your opponents are intelligent and develop a strategy that does reasonably well against intelligent opponents, because like the dumb opponents stop playing after a while. And I sometimes feel like people aren't thinking about like, you know, what's the long-term equilibrium when there's not incentive for journalism and for creatives to be rewarded for their efforts?
You're all making me think of a word that enters this equation, algorithms. And I was thinking particularly, each of you contributed to this. Jon Stewart, who many of you may have caught last Monday, the nimble expert, yes, on social media. John said, I want to quote him, social media, and this is about algorithms, social media is not the town square, it's not an open forum of ideas, it's got a plan. It's not free speech. It's to your word, Ken, it's an engineered lab in which they operate, whoever they are.
I mean,
Go ahead.
so I'm obsessed with algorithms, even as someone who knows very little about them. I am obsessed with the fact that we don't know. There's no transparency, right? Part of how we got here was Congress decided they didn't need to legislate tech companies. Some of them had children who worked at tech companies. Some of them were, Congress was so conflicted, and they really dropped the ball on regulating technology. There was a world where tech would be regulated, and magazines would get money for their content. This could have been legislated in a way that it wouldn't have been a complete disaster for the business. They never did that. So we have no transparency for the algorithm. We don't have a right to it, and we could, theoretically, if we had had smarter people in Congress. Don't get me started. I feel like this was one of the biggest malpractices on the left and the right, was that, they have no incentive to legislate Congress. They really don't. And so that's a part of how we got here. But I do think that we don't know. So the answer is we don't know what the plan is because we have no transparency. And we know that the TikTok algorithm is very, very sticky, right? And we know that, and we know the Chinese don't want to sell it because the algorithm is so good. But there's a world where Congress could have mandated transparency or at least some kind of clarity about the algorithm, unless I'm wrong.
Well, we do know that Elon kind of hard-coded literally a 1,000x weight to any tweets sent by Elon Musk. Apart from that, you can kind of reverse engineer it, which is it's kind of what you linger over. And it's very smart, where if you linger over something once, you'll be in this like endless doom loop. Like one thing, because videos are compelling, right? One time I watched a video, they're videos of like bullies or students who are bullied fighting back. It's some high school classroom, and the bully is stood up to, and the kid beats him up or whatever, right? And like it's kind of, compelling content. But once you watch one of those, and it keeps serving you those up over and over again, whenever people say, "Oh, my For You feed is all this weird stuff," it's like, okay, dude, that's probably because you're like, that's the shit that you're watching, and then it knows that you're watching. The tough thing is, I read the new Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson book, Abundance, which is all about the way that regulation has gone wrong in many ways, right? I think Silicon Valley is difficult to regulate. And look, I don't know, at some point, again, I'm an investor in Substack, I hope people just spend less time on there, right? And you see it now, and look, I'm someone who is often critical of Democrats and liberals on the left, right? And I kind of saw how I thought they were losing their minds on certain things. And you see the same thing now happening for Republicans, where it's like, here's someone who I thought was a respectable centrist businessman, and like they're defending the Houthi chat things
Right.
and defending tariffs. Like you look like a fucking idiot, right? And like only like a drug as powerful as Twitter might let you think that you look smart for defending this obviously indefensible stuff.
But clarity, I just think clarity, there's no reason not to give consumers clarity.
But you think if you gave them the algorithm, they would have clarity? They wouldn't understand it.
Right.
And in fact, one of the problems with the Congress, I think the problem in Congress is less conflict of interest than stupidity.
Right, no,
And-
100%.
And if you watch them when they grilled Zuckerberg on some of the others, the questions they asked were embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, they really had no knowledge. So, and actually, I would make another point, which is that the legacy media bears some responsibility. Because why they allow Google, for instance, to get access to their information? Why did they not charge for their information early on the way they're doing now? Too late in most cases. And Google would make the argument it's all about fair use. And they should have come back harder and say, fair use my ass. I mean, you're stealing entire articles from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. You can't do that. We'll see. If they tried to do that to Hollywood movies, Hollywood would have stepped in and said, no, go away, you can't do that. And the legacy media allowed them to do that.
We've
And,
gotta
and
talk-
bears a measure of blame.
I just want to follow up with you on legacy media for a moment, since you're there and know it so well. Looking at CBS, ABC being sued, looking at the Washington Post, these lawsuits, looking at lawyers getting sued, law firms getting sued. What's your take on that? Where are we headed with that?
It's appalling. I mean, I think last night at the conference where the Atlantic people were talking, at one point, Jeff Goldberg, the editor, asked the four panelists who work for the Atlantic, he said, when will we know whether we're in a constitutional crisis? And the unanimity, the uniform view was, we're in it already, guys, and that's proof of it. And what David Axelrod said in the previous panel this afternoon, he said, Viktor Orban of Hungary is the model for what Donald Trump is doing.
Yeah.
And so, and the press, you could also, I can make the same argument about the press caving the way they did with Google. They're caving today. For ABC to have settled, for, I think $15 million, for CBS now to allow them to claim that 60 Minutes did something untoward to favor the Democratic candidate, which is ridiculous. CBS 60 Minutes has released the transcript, and it doesn't show that at all. And yet, because they want the government approval of the merger of CBS, they cave.
But it's also, it doesn't work. Like we've seen, you don't satisfy a bully by giving them your stuff. Like that's not how it works. And we saw this from Trump 1.0. The people who caved ended up sooner or later, there's just no end to it. And the only way for these places to survive is to bargain collectively. You need every network together. You need every magazine, I personally feel my grandfather, Howard Fast, was jailed by HUVAC during the House of Un-American Activities, and I feel very much that this is a lot. If you're going to look at history, there's a real echo here. And I think the only way through this thing is for groups to get together. And we're seeing that, luckily, with some of the law firms now. That's the only way any of us are going to survive this thing.
Do you see any evidence that the law firms are getting together?
I think there's a little more, and I think, look, there has to be pushback, right? People have to push back. Consumers have a lot of power in this country, and they can push back on these kind of things, and ultimately networks, everyone's gonna have to do that or else. And I mean, I think they're gonna learn through, we hope they'll learn before it's too late.
I mean, if you look at the Republican members of Congress and how they could have gotten together, and yet every one of the cabinet appointments that Trump put forward, including some really ridiculous choices, got approved. And I don't see evidence. In fact, Paul Weiss, the managing partner, Paul Weiss, who caved to Trump, made the claim that I tried to get other law firms to join me, and they declined to. Instead, what they did was try to recruit our clients.
I mean, I think another issue here is that almost always in life, if you have a more long-term focus, then you'll benefit from that, right? People are impatient, they have pressure from shareholders and constituents. You know, look, I think some of the tech executives who came to Trump's inauguration and kind of bended the knee are gonna live with that for the rest of their lives. I'm not talking about guilty conscience, I'm saying like, you know, Trump's approval rating has already gone from plus 10 to 3 points underwater, right? You know, look, I do think one difference between the United States and other countries where you've had capital A authoritarianism take over is like Trump is not very popular and we're very decentralized. And there's a lot of, I'm not saying this is good, there's a lot of squishy middle ground where we become less democratic without becoming a capital A authoritarian country. You know, with respect to like, look, there is something for collective action. One reason why the book publishing industry is doing relatively well is because there are a smaller number of publishers and they've always been very protective of their copyright status. At the same time, like as an investor in Substack, I'm happy to capitalize on the mistakes the rest of the media makes, right? Where when Substack was founded in the 2020s, or in the 2020s, at first it was kind of heterodox centrist voices who felt like they were dealt out of the media as it became more woke. I don't think woke's a dirty term. I'm gonna say that term, right? You know, the Barry Weisses, the Matt Iglesias, right? The growth now is from like resistance blogs. It's from, you know, Paul Krugman. I think he told me or told someone else, the New York Times is the best pitch of real estate in the world if you're a public intellectual. Well, now we think Substack is better, right? You know, Jennifer Rubin gets cut by the Washington Post, and she has a very successful new Substack. Jim Acosta gets fired by CNN, right? And I'm not saying like I love every one of these people. Some of them are kind of, but at least we're showing that like, you know, the media's kind of fighting the last war. They're like, we overreached on Trump and Russia and resistance stuff last time. And now we were talking backstage, but you know, this is like a whole new, I mean, like, these are much more tangible consequences early on. The first term you have COVID and January 6th, right? But like, you know, Canadian air travel bookings are down 70%.
They don't want
for
to
the
come
summer,
here.
right? I mean, that's a big change for the world.
But Nate, let me ask you, I mean, one of the things Molly said was that if you get together, that's the way to defeat that move towards authoritarianism. The other alternate way is if the public turns on Trump. As a pollster, do you see evidence that they are turning against him because of some of these decisions he's making?
Yeah, so Trump has had among the faster declines in approval ratings in the first 2 months of his presidency. Now this is pretty normal. A president comes in with a honeymoon effect, and people realize. But like, what's different this time is I think like his numbers on the economy have never been this. It's almost the flip of it, right? It used to be he does a bunch of culture war stuff that people don't really like, right? But like he runs a good economy. Now it's kind of the reverse. I mean, I think Democrats did overreach on immigration and some of the wokeness stuff, right? And there's kind of a backlash to that, but it's like, but people are worried about the economy. It started in the consumer data. Eventually the consumer data becomes tangible if people stop spending as much. You hear lots of anecdotal data about real estate going down and like, you know, businesses want certainty. And if there's kind of chaos because of tariffs that are on again and off again, I mean, we might have a self-induced recession here, right? That's going to alienate a whole different group of voters than Trump did during the first term.
The thing that blew my mind about this administration was that you had people from the administration on television being like, we might have to have a recession. Like, there is no world in which you want to do that as a member of any administration. And in fact, I mean, it was shocking to me, you know, and I think, look, where they're coming from, the impulse is they want to bring manufacturing back to America. The problem is that there's just not a lot of thought to it. So, you know, if we just, and if you think about, I think Biden made a lot of political errors. I think his policy was a little bit different, and there was some policy in there that was kind of amazing. But the problem was because the politics weren't there, you never saw a lot of the policy.
Let's as we're halfway in here now, let's turn the page. I was hoping we'd have enough time for this. Let's turn the page to AI and to the so-called new news. And I found that this isn't going to surprise any folks, but it does tee up a lot of what we're talking about. In the new news category, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, X, and even in this case include the New York Times, The Daily. A third of the United States adults is getting their news from those platforms. And I don't see CBS or ABC. I don't see a lot of the mainstream papers, the legacy news that we knew so well. And it seems it's flipped even over more in social media, and we're racing ahead. And AI seem to be the two call letters that may affect more dramatically anything we've discussed so far.
It obviously might, and my attitude, I don't have a firm view. I have worries, but I also have impressive thoughts about what it could do. For instance, I've seen that AI is used for some local news reporting. They cover and provide transcripts of planning hearings and school board meetings in rural communities or communities where they don't have particularly local press, which has been cut back. They don't have the resources to cover them. But from that, they get information and they get leads of people they can call who spoke at a planning board meeting or a school board meeting and call them. And so that's an example of AI enhancing journalism and information. Mm-hmm. One of the great challenges we face in democracy in this country is the bifurcation of information. We don't have universal facts anymore. So if you watch Fox News, you get one set of facts. If you watch MSNBC or read the New York Times, you get another set of facts. Actually, the Times may be a little different than the facts they get from MSNBC. But in any case, that's a real worry because people and the algorithms, to make the point you were making before, it reinforces people, this is the information you want, we're going to send you more of the facts you want. And so people live in their own little bubble and can't communicate. So one of the things that was thrilling about watching Axelrod and his Republican counterpart at the previous panel, they were communicating and with the same language and the same set of facts, and that's increasingly rare. Certainly in the Congress, it's rare.
Yeah, how do you get that conversation going? How do you get people to start talking to each other just the way you're describing?
And AI may not be the answer to that, but at all. But the attitude I bring to that is the same attitude I brought when I was doing the Google book and looking at legacy media. And I was appalled by how legacy media said, for instance, we're digitizing the New York Times, or we're digitizing our newspapers, but it's the person in charge is the person who runs, our editor of the newspaper, and nothing can appear until the next morning. Yeah. Well, that's insane. I mean, if you think about it, it works. They should have had an attitude which says, I'm going to lean forward and I'm going to give it a chance and I'm going to be an optimist. And I think the same attitude should apply to AI.
Go ahead, Molly.
I think local news is an incredible opportunity to restore trust in the media. I think that if you live in a small town or city, say you live in, some rural Ohio town, and you have a local newspaper that is writing about your town's issues, you can see firsthand that news is a service. And I think the more that people can get back to news as a service, and I am on the opinion side, so I always say I'm an opinion journalist. I write an opinion, it's totally separate. I think the more that news, straight news, even though there is bias in straight news for sure, but the more straight news can separate from opinion, the better. And the more these things can start small and describe things that people are actually seeing in their lives, the more they can see news as a service. And I think that is the solve for public trust, for the public trust issue.
Yeah, and Substack can be good for that too because of micro audiences, right? Like my partner and I live part-time in a town in Westchester County. There's a Substack, it's like old-fashioned community newsletter, right? It's like, There's a new coffee shop going up here, and so-and-so was arrested for drunk driving the other day, right? So it's very old-fashioned, but you don't need that many subscribers if you find your audience. But look, I think AI is going to change everything. I don't think it's hype. I think it's, certainly one of the most important technologies of the century, to say the least. It already makes my work more efficient. I don't know that journalism will be as hard hit as some industries, although maybe we should make a distinction between opinion journalism versus fact gathering. AI models, large language models, or other AI systems are trained on very large amounts of original data, right? If you can still provide original ground truth data and reporting, I mean, that's still quite valuable, I think, right? The New York Times is suing OpenAI, and good for them, right? Because you want to kind of lay down a marker early, and and now you have AI image, they have a new image model, which is very clever, but where's the intellectual property? You're copying an artist's style and iterating on it, and is that art or is that whatever? But the coders are the ones who, because I'll type a little, I have my OpenAI GPT, I should say, ChatGPT set so that it shows its thinking more and more. I'm like, okay, here's a medium complex data manipulation task. You translate this one list into a different list, right? And it shows me now the Python script that it writes itself, right? It makes its own code and executes its own code, and the coders are going to be in trouble before the journalists. But I think more broadly, when we have the next recession, which might be later this year,
we might be in it now.
we might be in it. I mean, recessions are post-dated. We could be in a recession right now. I worry that you're going to see a lot of white-collar jobs not rehired when we come out of the recession in a year or whatever, because people will say this AI stuff is pretty good. It's like a pretty good research assistant at the very least. It's getting better, and that's going to disrupt things, I think, in ways that are profound.
I want to go back, Molly, just for a second to the local news point you were making. I spend a lot of time in local newsrooms, particularly down south here. Got a newsroom in New Orleans. They're nonprofit newsrooms. And part of the problem is getting the value proposition to local communities and to states to get people in the trenches, in the streets, in the hood, to support it. And that's not an easy task. But more particularly, where I see for journalists, the battleground is holding government accountable. To get and to train and to find young journalists, and AI starts to work into this, and the new news platforms and how you talk to a community as a journalist and cover it, that's at risk. And it's great to talk about, but the reality is it's tough every day.
Right.
Really tough to cover a state capital, and the AP is gone frequently from some of these places, UPI, all those news services we relied on just for the bare bones is pretty much gone.
And Andrew, isn't another problem, the digital tool allows you to measure what your reader is reading.
Yep.
And what that does is they say, well, no one is interested in these investigative stories on the state capitol or city hall. Kim Kardashian, give us more of that. Isn't that a basic problem?
Well, but one thing I'd say, having been on a lot of platforms now on Substack, is all these different metrics can be unreliable, right? The things that get tons of likes because they express often a popular political sentiment, aren't necessarily what drives subscriptions, right? I did a wonky post about congestion pricing in New York that got very few likes, but it did pretty well for subscriptions, right? It's really in depth, and so people need to they're optimizing for the wrong thing, I think, a lot.
And more importantly, congestion pricing is amazing.
It is.
It's so good. Anyone who lives in Manhattan is
I second that.
It's a game changer. I want to talk about anti-corruption because I think that is the key issue when we talk about local news. So if we get out, if this administration ends and we get back to normal, which could happen, we hope, probably like with Nixon, there will be an anti-corruption push, right? Because we're going to right? I mean, we hope, right? We're going to discover that a lot of the very rich people who took government jobs didn't do it because of the goodness of their heart. They did it to make money. And so there will be a sort of anti-corruption push. And the question is, and I think it's a real, there's a lesson from Trump 1.0, which was there was not the kind of legislation that needed to happen, the way that it happened after Nixon, the kind of anti-corruption legislation that needed to happen. And so we find ourselves in a sort of wilderness again. And I do think that that there could be a real push for more journalism, more accountability in government, so that we don't have, because the road to Trump 2.0 was paved with, well, it's not illegal, or it's not too illegal, or we'll just let this one slide.
But you know, Trump, actually, his argument is that he's fighting corruption.
Right, no, I know.
All the cuts in government, he's cutting corruption. It's horse maneuver, but nevertheless, that's an argument. And he's making it, and so far, I mean, he's been successful in the claims. He has not been punished by the public the way you or I might like him to be.
But his numbers show that they're not buying it.
Well,
Yeah, look, I mean, remember, Trump won the popular vote, did not quite get a majority, but 49.9%, right? So it was only, 5 months ago people validated this, and the fact that he's not just having undecideds turn against him, he's losing some of his core supporters, right? And if you're in the news business, news, reporting, opinion, whatever else, you forget that, like, most people are paying sporadic attention to this kind of thing, right? The fact that you're only now starting to see things like protests at Tesla dealerships or whatever else, right? You're seeing it, by the way, in like special election results.
Right.
So
I mean,
Republicans were going to nominate Stefanik to the UN, and now
Right,
they're
that
worried about
was-
losing a district in upstate New York that Trump won by 20 points,
Yeah,
right?
that was going to be my example. Like, you don't pull that Stefanik nomination unless you're a little worried.
Yeah, and they're worried about the, I guess not the Matt Gaetz seat, but the other seat in Florida, the Waltz.
Florida 6.
Yeah, but so I don't doubt that there will be a political backlash. Will you get better government out of it? I don't know. I worry about race to the bottom dynamics a lot. In New Orleans, I love New Orleans, fantastic city. Why is the food so amazing in New Orleans? And not just the Creole Cajun, I'm going to mess up these terms, right? It's partly because of the mix of cultural influence, but also it's competition.
Right.
Same thing in New York, right? We went to a random Italian place for lunch. It was actually super good because, like, there's so many good restaurants in New York, it's only going to survive if it's good. Here, because Republican Party, their fitness as a political party, as a policymaking party, is so poor, it's like evolution in reverse, devolution. Where now Democrats can have poor fitness. That's what Ezra's book is about, where they can be very sloppy in the way they're building infrastructure, for example. They say, well, Republicans are worse. I voted for Harris, I suppose it's true, but like that, and Trump gets a lot of mileage out of the excesses and the mistakes that Biden and Democrats did make, and public is losing patience with that already, but it bought him, enough time and 53 votes in the Senate, and so, I don't know, yeah.
Is the solve for that to have nonpartisan primaries?
I mean, the experts, quote unquote, kind of differ. I think it's probably a good idea. I mean, look, maybe we need a parliamentary system. We're probably not going to have that change happen anytime fast, right? I was like, studying the German election, and I was jealous. In the German election, they have like 7 different parties, right? If you want a party that's left-wing but anti-immigrant, there's a whole new party for that, right? If you want a party that's like libertarian but anti-Europe, there's a little party for that, right? And we have these 2 big parties that smush everything down into one dimension, and it's kind of a remarkable feature that elections are basically 50-50, right? There are no kind of permanent majorities anymore. To his credit, I'm not sure if this is the right term to use, right? Trump did figure out, and the people behind him figured out that, like, we're going to have very tenuous majorities in the Congress, so you have to do it through the executive, right? And do it first, because you'll never have more political capital than when you in your first 60 days, right? So it's probably downhill from here in various ways. I mean, they're worried about losing the House before next year if they have enough special elections.
Yeah.
But they at least understood how modern politics work, whereas you go back, and then Biden, by the way, Biden got a lot done. I am very critical of how the last 2 years went and the decision to renominate Biden, right? He got a lot done with very narrow majorities in the first 2 years, and so that was quite impressive, whereas Obama had this filibuster-proof majority and got less done than Biden, so.
Let me throw in something here, though, that touches on where you're all pushing through. Technology, which I thought would be a friend to democracy on some level, that would bring us together in ways that we never expected. Rural broadband, connecting communities that were not easily connected, and more to the point, even in the big cities where the most sophisticated populations live in the country often, we're more polarized, more separated, more disagreeable, and we are looking at the fabulously wealthy, the enormous amount of wealth that's been created by the tech pioneering revolution in the last 20 years. And here we are. Here we are like this, and we're asking each other, how do we talk better to each other to come to better results?
But one of the offshoots of having so many different media places and platforms to appear is that if you're running for office or you're a member of Congress, you say, the only way I'm going to get attention is to say something really sharp and controversial and maybe ugly and attack. And that's what increasingly those multi-platforms encourage that kind of behavior.
Then we're back at
and
the
that
algorithm.
behavior leads to polarization.
I would like to add that among other things we thought would make democracy better, remember when we thought small dollar donations would make democracy better? And it turns out Marjorie Taylor Greene does really well with small dollar donations. And in fact, it does not make the discourse less destructive. We thought it did.
How do we get our arms around getting the platforms, getting these very wealthy, smart technology leaders to do something that we feel is more responsible in ways that empower the country in a way they don't seem to care about? It's all about the innovation that spreads through a lack of disruption, it seems to me, in this instance. I mean, in terms of what disrupting them and their mission. We can't get them to regulate or take responsibility or a social responsibility for these platforms we were talking about a moment ago.
I don't question that we should put more pressure on the digital giants in terms of information and policing. But, you know, there's this notion, which you hear often, more so from Democrats, but you would hear it from Republicans until recently, where they feel the digital giants are on their side now. But they would say Section 230, we have to, people on cable or the internet, if you're Google or you're Facebook and people put information on you under Section 230,
You may need to explain Section
yeah,
230.
it means you're not
It may take 18
responsible
minutes, but give it a go.
for the information that appears on your site, unlike, say, a broadcast network, which is responsible
So
for
it means
So the
you can't
argument,
sue. It means you can't sue Facebook for a story that's not true.
yeah, and you can't require them to police the information that appears. In fairness, it's really complicated. How does, with billions of people on Facebook in the world, for just taking Facebook, you can do the same argument about Google. And how do you know what someone's going to say before they say it in order to police them? It's really complicated. And so, and I have a hard time feeling sympathetic for Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
But it's complicated, and he has a right to say it's complicated. But he doesn't have a right to say, I can't do better with my algorithms, and yes, I'm guilty of encouraging children to be on my site, and so I have advertisers love the size of our audience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What do you think, Nate, about that?
I do not think that Facebook, et cetera, should be responsible for what users write on the platform in that sense. So look, I'm an old-fashioned believer in free speech. I think it's been depressing to see the left abandon free speech, and obviously anyone on the right are huge hypocrites too, right? If we're now like arresting exchange students, literally you have people plain clothes arresting students on the street for writing editorials about the Middle East, right? I mean, that's disgusting, and that is capital A authoritarian.
Yeah.
But I don't want to chill free speech. I think it's complicated, but I don't think that's the core of the problem. I think it's more, you said all these tech guys are super smart. I mean, I wrote a book, A Lot of On the Edge, is about my experience talking to people in Silicon Valley and kind of seeing the politics change. And there are a lot of reasons for that, ranging from like old-fashioned self-interest, where California has lots of regulations and taxes, to cultural alienation. But like, I think they have what I call spiky intelligence, right? They're very smart, I mean, Elon's amazing in certain ways, right? He's founded 6 really amazing companies, and he's also a huge fucking idiot, right? Because people are complicated. A lot of them are on the spectrum or have things they're very good at and don't know their limitations. And you know, once you kind of commit this act where you shut out any outside feedback, any critical feedback, then there's kind of no going back, right? You know, Sam Harris has written about how Elon used to be his buddy and they would text each other, and then just the relationship, he was ghosted, basically, because Sam Harris was a smart guy that Elon respected. It would provide criticism and negative feedback. When you start shutting all of that out and you have more money than God, then it's probably going to end badly eventually, but with a lot of collateral damage.
I don't want to compliment Elon here, but there is something, he didn't create it, but I do think there is something that is actually excellent on X, and it's community notes. Community notes is a way for people to vote, so if you say, for example, there was this judge said she was going to retire, and then she tweeted, "No, I'm not," this Ohio Democratic judge. And then Community Notes said, "This is false," and it had been voted up. So there are fact check ways. And like, what I think is Facebook pretended, I really think, I have in my head sort of who's the most evil list going.
Oh, do tell.
And I actually think Facebook is the most evil because of the genocide stuff, and I don't think that's good.
Do you know anyone who does think it's good?
No, but I think that they have, there are ways to community notes. There are ways to have policing on the platform. They have really made a concerted effort not to do that. Right, exactly.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
They fired. Facebook reduced the staff that would try and
Yes,
police
the fact checkers and
misinformation.
Yeah.
And there's really a way to do it so that, with community notes, they don't have to pay anyone. They can keep all of the billions of dollars,
Yeah, and then you have to have bipartisan agreement, right? Because look, I am someone who thinks that some of the fact checking did become quite partisan, and that's probably, you can have people who are well-intentioned, and it can get hijacked or co-opted by bipartisans. But yeah, that seems to work. And Wikipedia has become a little bit more politicized, but still Wikipedia has this same model, and it still works pretty darn well for the most part.
Stay with this for another few moments. Where do you go and really see what you disagree with and want to say, wait a second, and find a way to talk about what was said that you so maybe profoundly disagree with and respond? And see where a dialogue can go in that regard. I'd even use, say, the most familiar one in legacy media, Fox News. Do you watch Fox News?
I do. I don't watch it as often as I watch CNN, but I watch it, and in part I watch it to see what they're doing, and because I'm very interested in that subject, the point I was trying to make before about what's a fact and
Yes.
no universal facts. And if you watch Fox at night, you're not talking about facts, you're talking about opinions. But opinions become facts for people who watch Fox, and that's worrisome. But I sample a fair amount of stuff.
Nate?
I don't really watch TV apart from sports, right? I'll watch presidential debates, I guess. No, look, I used to work for a TV network, ABC News, and talk about the age divide, right? Their average viewer is 71 years old or something, right? Look, I think if you, look, again, I'm promoting the product that I work with and for, but I do think Substack, one nice thing about it is part of the problem is, as things grow, then they become terrible, right? For the time being, Substack's small enough where there's generally pretty good banter and pretty good agreement, and localities are good. I'm sure Molly and I have probably disagreed on stuff on the internet before, right? But you put people in a room in front of an audience, right? And you're we probably agree on 80% of stuff, and boy, wouldn't it be a lot smarter to be constructive about that 80% instead of rip each other about the 20%? And so, but as things get larger and larger and more impersonal and less community, then that becomes harder.
I watch C-SPAN, and I'm a big C-SPAN evangelist. In fact, they sent me a fleece. It was the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. I love C-SPAN, and I think that actually I want to watch hearings from beginning to end, and I don't trust where they're clipped, and you really see how much opinion goes into straight news when you watch an entire C-SPAN hearing. And in fact, the joke in my house, because I have 3 teenage children, is that like sometimes C-SPAN is too exciting, so we go to C-SPAN 3.
Yeah, yeah. I've been known to spend a lot of time on C-SPAN 2,
Yeah.
because C-SPAN, this won't take too long. C-SPAN,
You can tell people, when you say C-SPAN, everyone starts to fall asleep.
I'm a little bit of a C-SPAN junkie, but there's, you mentioned the key word, hearings.
Yeah.
If you went to, for example, the other day, the hearings on public media, and listened to the leaders of NPR and public broadcasting, PBS, and the 7 Republicans and the 7 Democrats having at those 2 people, both very eloquent and experienced in their roles. The hearing was introduced by Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah. Doge.
Yeah.
Who called them communist, right?
Oh, yeah, among other things. Right. And the point was that you saw this America
Right.
in the in the House, and you could see how it worked, and how, and the level of play in the room that was unknowable. Who was going to say, who was going to answer the questions that you're homophobic, or you're against, or you're racist, or you're, Sesame Street is racist and homophobic, effectively. It got to a kind of demonization of these very familiar areas where we have our children watch, or we talk about ourselves. And it struck me that we're missing too much of that in more accessible social media, because C-SPAN isn't going to be a go-to channel for folks. But how in social media, or in the worlds you know well, all of you differently, you get more of that. I mean, it was interesting, I think, for folks to actually look and listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she prepared for this and what she did. And it was her special thing. It was her committee, her subcommittee. How do we get that level of engagement with each other?
What I'm always disappointed by is that the evening news doesn't do more of the hearings and what's happening in Congress and in the Senate. You don't get that being picked up by the larger news organizations.
But you know, CBS tried to change the format for its evening news a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to have fewer stories for a headline driven. We're going to dig into stuff. We're going to do much like 60 Minutes does. And it's been a total failure.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no order. The audience plunged.
Do you look at your audience? How do you look at who's paying attention to you on Substack?
I mean, yeah, I have the Substack dashboard and the Stripe dashboard are empirically, they're frequently clicked links based on my browser history. But also you learn, you are very much playing a long game, right? If I've had a bunch of politics articles in a row, I also cover sports and other things, posting about sports, you get some unsubscribes. People are like, oh, all the people who just subscribe to your politics stuff are like, oh, I didn't know that you also cover sports, and why is this in my inbox? You have to be playing a long game. I mean, look, I think the quality of legislators is another big issue here. I mean, first of all, they're way too old, right? We need a Congress that looks more like America in lots of different ways. Not all 70-year-old former lawyers who went to Yale or whatever. I mean, the problem is, you are kind of have social media celebrities in Congress. I think there's some evidence that actually congressional hearings have had this unintended effect where they lead to more grandstanding and more performance, right? I mean, look, if you had a private ballot after January 6th, I think there would have been enough votes to convict Trump and also bar him from running office again, right? But he is strategic about saying, don't cross me or else you're going to get, whatever. And so, I don't know. This is where I guess I have to slightly contradict my earlier claim about the importance of transparency, because there are some things where it becomes performative, where it can be a race to the
One of
bottom.
the great things about the Substacks and true of the New Yorker, it's true of the Atlantic, it's true of the Times, true of the Economist and the FT, when they are not dependent on advertising. And the subscription model really works. But it works only if you have an upscale audience that can afford to increasingly pay higher rates for their subscription.
In just, I think we got 5 minutes left. I'm curious about the influencers in your life. These influencers for our kids' generations interest me. Who they follow, who influences their thinking, both politically, socially. Do you have any? Nate?
I don't.
Any
I'm not on
go-to-
social networks, and because I want to read, I want to have. I don't want to spend my time checking what the latest tweet is. I mean, just not, or Facebook posting.
Fair enough. Yeah. Molly?
So my influencers are like Joan Didion and Gore Vidal. I like good writing and I like beautiful prose. So I have no place on the internet, and those are the people who influence me.
Yeah, look, Michael Lewis is somebody who helped organize this festival and somebody who terrific writer and writes about dense, wonky topics in an entertaining way, which is part of what I try to do in my book writing, right? On the Substack, look, I think if you're in the craft of journalism, I'm doing well, don't worry, right? It's a dynamic and often difficult business, so I think you owe it to yourself. By the way, any industry, right? My partner is an artist, basically, and if you're an artist, thinking about the business of your industry is really important, because it's a hard industry, right? And so, the fact that, Matt Iglesias was doing really well on Substack, I'm it's probably a pretty good comp in some ways, right? And it's nerdy and wonky, and, he did super well, way better than he was doing, working for corporate media, and so, that was, I like Matt, obviously, but, that was influential in my thinking about, leaving. Not that I had a choice in the end, but, my eagerness to pursue the newsletter route.
Do you find in your toing and froing young folks who want to be journalists? In your work, do you come in contact with people who are really saying, how do I get in your line of work?
Less than I did 10 or 15 years ago. There's less, because they don't see the same opportunities that they saw 15 or so years ago to be a journalist and to make a career. They know, I was talking to a journalist here, last night, and he loves what he does, and he's good at what he does, and he has a following, and he has enemies, politicians he's written about, but he doesn't make much money. And he knows that. He loves doing it. But if you're just out of college and you say, where's the money? How am I going to make it? How am I going to have a family? How am I going to support this? And it's a problem. Now, some of the people who left and joined Substack and are doing very well, it's actually can be very lucrative, which is great.
Yeah, I worry a little bit about, it's good for opinion journalism. It's good for beats, right? I'm not sure it's great for original reporting, right? The New York Times...
This guy knows more about it than we do because he runs local news.
Keep going.
Well, no, look, the New York Times makes a lot of money from Wordle, from the Hamptons real estate section, right? From their opinion columnists, and loses money on having bureaus in Yemen and Somalia and places like that, right? Kind of thankless territory. And so if you kind of, if the Paul Krugmans or the Mollys or the Nates or the Kens can go start their own Substack and be more successful, then, we are taking that profit for ourselves, maybe doing some hiring. By the way, I am hiring, and lots of very bright applicants to the point where it worried me that maybe we're going into recession, right? These people are way too qualified to to take this job. But yeah, I think, for better or worse, we're in a dynamic capitalistic system, and the kind of market will find efficiencies.
Right.
But look, we're not lacking for young, bright talent, I don't think, although more and more professor friends are I do think ChatGPT is making students stupider, and the learning loss in the pandemic, I think, was another mistake that the left make, but not worry about that. But I am a little bit worried, but I think journalism will always attract bright, idealistic young people.
Well, also, I just want to point out, we're almost out of time, but there was this big push so I have twins who are 17, and when they started school, there was this huge push for STEM, that all your kids, especially girls, so my daughter goes to a girls' school, and they all need to be little scientists. And I would push my daughter to do coding, and she hated it and thought it was totally stupid, and would like do the stories behind the coding. And now that she's a junior, they're like, we need girls in the humanities.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a little bit like of this trendiness where they push the kids and then they can't find the kids they need. And I just wonder how much is that.
Okay, on that wonderful note, let's call it a day. Thank you very much.